Coming up on this episode, Draymond Green's fiery exchange with a reporter, the emphasis on shooting, Stephen Curry's involvement in off-season trade discussions, and so much more from a jam-packed 2024 Warriors Media Day. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. For those of you listening or watching on YouTube, it will probably be the morning after 2024 Warriors Media Day. Technically for me, it's still the night of. To give you a bit of a rundown of my past 24 hours, it's just gone 9:30 p.m. here in Australia on Tuesday night. I went to sleep at about 11:30 p.m. last night, got about 2.5 hours sleep in, thought I'll wake up at 2 a.m., set my alarm for that time, got up, followed the Warriors Media Day coverage and wrote about it concurrently for about 4 hours, thought at 6 a.m. it's probably time for me to get back to bed and try and get a few more hours sleep in, which I did. Got back up at about 9:30, 10 a.m. Since then, majority of the day I've spent writing some more for BlueManHoop.com. I've been out for dinner tonight and thought that I'll come home, jump on, record a podcast episode just before I get to bed. So if you want to check out more of my coverage, as I said, you can head over to BlueManHoop.com. Otherwise, plenty of the discussion points and topics will be covered in this podcast episode. There's so much to get through, so many storylines and talking points from Media Day that will transition now, obviously, into the Warriors training camp as they head to Hawaii preseason, and then, of course, their season opener against the Portland Trail Blazers, which is now just over 3 weeks away, about 3 weeks away. It's amazing that basketball is on the horizon for us to watch. Let's start with Draymond Green, and the fiery exchange is what it's being described as between him and a reporter at Media Day today. I didn't really see it as too much of an issue. There was a bit of a back and forth, obviously. I actually thought both sides had a point, and I didn't really care too much about it, but it's worth, just to get it out of the way more so than anything, it's worth discussing briefly. Basically, a reporter, I'm not sure who it was, so I apologize for that, but a reporter was asking Draymond or just referring to the anxiety that fans have surrounding Draymond Green and basically his history suspension and where that puts him now in terms of, hey, if he gets another suspension this season, next season, whenever it may be, it could really put his NBA career in jeopardy. And I don't think that's overstating things by any means. I think obviously it all depends on what the suspension's for, how egregious whatever misconduct or act, comes from Draymond. Clearly, that's all going to play into it, but you see what happened last season with the 2 suspensions. It's clear that Draymond's walking on thin ice, not necessarily with the Warriors organization, but just the NBA in general. And the reporter was basically saying that, hey, fans are worried about you, Draymond. To which he, pretty quickly responded and pointed out, hey, you don't need to be worried about me. And I think he's got the right to say, hey, I'm a professional athlete. I've made hundreds of $1 million in my career. I'm a 4-time NBA champion, multi-time All-Star. There's so many more people in the world that you need to worry about with me. And that is completely true, right? Because we're talking about just sport at the end of the day, and there's so many bigger things in life to be worried about. But in the context of just Warriors fandom and following this team, yeah, I think there's a right to be worried about Draymond Green and whether or not he'll get himself into mischief this season. So I do think both sides are right to a degree, and I don't really have an issue with how Draymond responded. I know a lot of fans were frustrated with the lack of accountability with his suspensions, which has been a bit of a running theme really over the past 12 months or since that first suspension came about with the chokehold on Rudy Gobert. I know a lot of people across social media are frustrated with that, and particularly Draymond's comments today of saying, oh, well, everyone misses games. That I get that's a bit frustrating, absolutely. But I also agree with Draymond that he's shown over his 13-year career with the Warriors that he has consistently been available. Yes, there's been the odd suspension here and there, no doubt, but he's usually always available for usually always available for the big games. But I mean, 2016 NBA Finals Game 5 might suggest different. Anyway, I think both sides have a point. And I didn't really have an issue with either side. I think the reporter was fair enough to ask the question and kind of raise to Draymond that fans are concerned about him and his suspension history and where that might lead him now over the remainder of his career. And I think Draymond was okay in responding the way he did. It's just obvious that Draymond is usually going to create a spotlight on himself in media day, and he always says what he thinks, and that's part of what we love about Draymond. It's part of what we're also frustrated with about Draymond. The issue I had with him today actually stemmed to something he said from a basketball perspective, which is what I want to talk about, obviously, mostly in this episode. So Draymond Green, I fully acknowledge he's played the game at a higher level. He knows a million times more than I do when it comes to the game of basketball. But I fear that he almost treated fans like fools today. And I hugely applaud the two-way loyalty that Draymond and the Warriors organization have between each other. And clearly you need to have that to have a relationship for, Draymond's entering his 13th or 14th season, whatever it is. Clearly you need to have that for a relationship to last that long. And I think the Warriors have put up with plenty from Draymond that, other players might not get away with necessarily, but Draymond has always also supported the franchise, led the franchise to 4 NBA championships, been a multi-time All-Star, as I said, and usually defends the franchise in terms of their decision-making. But I think the way that he kind of defended the franchise's decision-making today, I have a hard time believing that he actually believes what he said. And I don't know whether he actually legitimately believes what he said or if he's just trying to back in the franchise, which is fine. I understand it. But it's also playing fans like fools a little bit. And it specifically refers to a comment in the makeup of the roster. So he was basically comparing Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, and D'Anthony Melton, the three big Warrior acquisitions this offseason. He was basically comparing them to the 2021 acquisitions of Otto Porter Jr., Nemanja Bjelica, and Gary Payton II, and how they could have how those guys had an impact on the Warriors 2021-22 championship team, and how these three guys could make a similar impact for Golden State. But he also said that a team's potential is best measured by what it gets from players 6 through 10. I don't think I've ever disagreed with something Draymond Green said more in my life, from a purely basketball perspective. Don't care about the suspensions, what he's done in terms of misconduct, other stuff off the court, whatever it may be. In terms of actual pure basketball discussion, I don't think I've ever disagreed more with something Draymond Green said, who is an incredibly smart basketball mind. As I said, a million times smarter than me. So I actually feel a bit incompetent when I'm going to try and argue against this. But I have a hard time believing that many people out there think that a team's potential is best measured by what it gets from players 6 through 10. That just simply isn't true to me. That is simply not true. To me, players 6 through 10, guys like Buddy Hield, D'Anthony Melton, Kyle Anderson, going back 2021-22, Bjelica, Otto Porter, Gary Payton II, valuable role players, no doubt. And I think that lifts the floor of a team to some degree. It also significantly helps a team during the regular season when you've got quality role players, as Draymond said, 6 through 10 on your roster. You've got quality role players there. That helps you win a lot of regular season games. When it comes to the playoffs, stars win championships, right? And a team's potential is not based on role players. It's based on how your superstars perform. The Warriors won the 2021-22 championship because Stephen Curry went nuclear throughout that 2022 final series against the Celtics, and specifically in Game 4 in Boston. That is why the Warriors won the championship. They did not win the championship because of Otto Porter Jr. They did not win it because of Nemanja Bjelica. Yes, Porter started the last 3 games and was crucial in the turnaround. Absolutely, sure, no doubt. Played a valuable part. Nemanja Bjelica randomly guarded Tatum well for a few possessions. Great. Gary Payton II, solid contributor. They're not the reason the Warriors won the championship. It's about star players. It always is, right? And particularly in a game like basketball, I think basketball is so far more determined by star players than most other sports in the league because there's only 5 players on the court for each team at one time. And therefore, I follow Australian rules football. There's 18 players on the field for each team at any one time. Therefore, each individual player, in my opinion, cannot have as much of an impact in a sport like that when there's so many athletes on the field than a sport like basketball when there's only 5 players on each team. It's why the addition of a superstar to any one team can make such a huge difference, right? Superstars run this league, right? And to say that a team's potential is based on players 6 through 10 is simply not true, in my opinion. It's just not, right? If the Warriors are to get back into championship contention or any kind of deep playoff contention, it will be because either they've traded for a second star to pair with Steph Curry, or because Jonathan Kuminga, maybe Brandon Pajemski, maybe Andrew Wiggins, or a combination of those three players have developed into close to all-star caliber players. And Draymond himself remains one of the best defensive players in the league, a defensive star as such, right? The Warriors won't be a deep playoff team this season because of Kyle Anderson or DeAnthony Melton or Buddy Hield. Could those guys help the Warriors make the playoffs? Yes, absolutely, no doubt. Will they help them get to the Western Conference Finals and the NBA Finals? Yes, they will help. Will they be the reason? No. The Warriors are not reaching that stage without their star players. They need Stephen Curry to remain a top 10 player in the league. They either need to make a trade for a second star or have one of their young players or Wiggins returning to that star level. Right? Stars run this league. And I just thought it was the most I've ever disagreed with the Draymond Green comment in regard to basketball, on-court basketball perspectives. I didn't get it. The other thing that I have less of an issue with in regard to what Draymond said, but still critique it a little bit, is the fact that he was defending Mike Dunleavy Jr. and the front office after failing to get Lauri Markkanen, after failing to get Paul George, and saying and applauding and lauding Dunleavy in the front office for being patient, right? For being patient. And he stated that sometimes the best deal is to not make a deal at all. Now, that might be right, but it's also, it's easy for you to make that comment. It's easy for Dunleavy to make a similar comment like that, to preach patience to the franchise, to the fan base, when we as the fan base or anyone outside the organization doesn't know what other deals are on the table. So when Draymond Green says, "Oh, I pushed the Warriors not to make this trade because it's a bad one," well, that's his perspective, but we can't critique it as a fan base, as analysts, unless we actually know what the potential deal on the table was, right? And so it's pretty impossible for us to analyze whether or not Draymond's right in saying that's a bad trade, or criticize the franchise for not making the trade and, keeping this line of, hey, we're being patient until we can get a near perfect deal or something that really, really suits us. So I have less of an issue with that, but I still acknowledge that it's easy for anyone in the franchise to say that internally and spread that to the media and the public, when the media and the public don't necessarily know what was on the table in terms of this bad trade that Draymond's speaking about or whatever else. So just a few things from Draymond there, and him obviously, as I said, lauding the franchise for being patient. And I find that really interesting. And I applaud Draymond for the loyalty he's showing to the franchise, for looking beyond his own career and looking after the Warriors' future, because I can understand in a similar situation if he was like, you know what, that doesn't really make sense from a long-term perspective, but you know what, that does help us this season. Hey, I'm 34 years old, looking to the back end of my career. I want to win as many championships as possible. Yeah, make that trade. Pull the trigger. Yeah, I could understand him doing that. I could fully understand Steph doing that. Hey, we're two of the greatest players in the history of the franchise. Prioritize us. Is it a bad trade from a 5-10 year window? Yeah, maybe. Is it going to help us in the immediate term in the next season or two? Yep. Okay, make the trade. I understand that. And fans are battling with that perspective and the push and pull of whether the Warriors should make a deal like that. So I get Draymond, his loyalty to the franchise. I think it's great. But I also don't want him to treat the fan base like fools when he has a comment like, "Oh, well, look at, Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, DeAnthony Melton. Our potential, is really based on player 6 through 10. That's just not true. I just don't think it is. That's, again, I'm not going to, sorry, I shouldn't say it's not true because it's my opinion. And let me know what you think. But my perspective is that the NBA, this league this sport is run by its stars, right? And I think you see that in front office moves all the time and superstar players dictating moves around the league and acting like GMs sometimes. Like, I just think that's what it is. And it's hard to get away from that. But to say that, the team's potential is based players 6 through 10, I just disagree with that wholeheartedly. Anyway, one of the biggest things, I think the biggest thing to take away from Media Day for the Warriors was the emphasis on shooting. Shooting here, shooting there. I really got away from it that the Warriors are not trying to replace Klay Thompson with any one player. We might see Buddy Hield come in and think, yeah, you know what, he can take 8 threes a game, shoot 40+%. He's one of the best three-point shooters in the last 10 years, made the most threes in the league over the last 5 years. That's a fact. But it's clear to me that the Warriors are trying to replace Klay's three-point shooting in a team-first approach rather than any one player, because there is so much emphasis from a number of players on their three-point shooting, none more so than Kevon Looney, who we know is trying to rejuvenate his game with his shooting from mid-range and then extending to the three-point line. He outlined and revealed more about that at Media Day, saying that he's taken 400 to 500 threes per day during the off-season, which is like, we can say, oh, well, like, you're a professional athlete, you got nothing else to do, you might as well work on your game. Getting up 400 to 500 threes per day, that's not much. But I think it's really relevant when you're talking about a guy who has literally taken 3 3-point attempts in the last 3 years, 1 in each of the last 3 seasons. And you're talking about a guy who's a decade into his career, and now he's trying to completely revamp his game. He looks noticeably slimmer. DeAnthony Melton, made the comment of, we're trying to get back to the Loon high school mixtape. And he certainly does look, as I said, he looks a lot slimmer. He's talking about the shooting. It's going to be really interesting to see. It's going to be one of the biggest, fascinations of preseason. Is this shooting going to transition into actual in-game effectiveness? And I think there's still a big question mark on that, but that certainly leads to intrigue for fans, and I'm sure for Steve Kerr and everyone like that. The more interesting one for me, even maybe, was Kyle Anderson's three-point shooting, and the fact that it wasn't even Slo Mo who brought it up. It was actually Brandon Bajemski who had his press conference before Slo Mo, and Pods basically said that, hey, in the scrimmages, we've been shooting really well, and then he was asked who specifically, individually, has been shooting the ball really well, and Pods kind of said, well, you guys would be surprised, but Kyle Anderson, jump shot looks pretty, fairly different. And then Slo Mo was obviously asked about it in his press conference, stated that, he's been healthy enough this offseason to actually have the time and the opportunity to get out on the floor and kind of rework his mechanics, starting from, near the rim and then extending out to the three-point line. So that's going to be really fascinating, because I've spoken about all offseason. If Kyle Anderson can get back to being a reasonable three-point shooter where he can make his fair share of wide open ones, because he will be wide open, at least initially, until he shows an ability to be able to knock them down consistently. If he can do that, then that completely unlocks the Warriors to a different degree, unlocks his capacity to be able to play maybe 22 to 28 minutes rather than 15 to 20 minutes, that kind of thing. So I'm certainly interested in that. Other aspects to it, we know Pods. We know going back into the offseason, Pods, he outlined his goal to take like 8 threes a game. Not sure if that's realistic, but we'll see where he gets to. We know he's working on his three-point shooting. JK, we know that's a big emphasis for him, trying to be able to play more at the small forward spot. Can he shoot better than the 32, 33%? Even what Josh Cornelison said a couple of episodes ago about JK, his three-point attempts kind of stagnating across the first 3 years of his career. So not only the shooting percentages, but the volume as well for Jonathan Kuminga. And then the other one as well, Andrew Wiggins. I think Steve Kerr said that he wants Wiggs to take at least 6 threes a game, which is quite a jump from, I think, the 3.5 that he averaged last season, which was a real plummet from where he had been over his tenure with the Warriors, which was, around that 5.5 3-point attempt mark. And so it's all positive. It's all positive, but it's also all in theory, and we haven't seen it in reality. I think it's a big need for the Warriors, given that last season they only had two players, Steph and Clay, who averaged more than 1.3 3-point makes per game. Last season, before that, they'd had 4 or 5 guys make at least 1.5 3-point attempts, not 3-point attempts, 3-point makes per game. So I think it's a huge thing for the Warriors, not just in terms of replacing Klay Thompson, but just opening up the floor, and particularly in the front court where there has been a lack of spacing, and guys like JK, Slo Mo, Loon, if he can do it. TJD was also asked about it. I think he was a bit more hesitant to kind of dive into this idea that he's going to start shooting mid-range and 3-point jump shots like Loon was. And I think that's probably more of a case of TJ knows his value and where his impact lies right now, as opposed to a guy like Loon who has come off a really disappointing season and kind of sees himself as, oh, hang on, I'm going to have to rejuvenate my game, revitalize my game to be able to actually get on the floor to secure my NBA future, because we know that he's obviously coming, he's on an expiring contract now. He's going to be looking for a new deal. And for a guy like Loon, he stated today, he's like, I don't want my offense to be the reason why I'm not on the floor. And spoke about being more attacking, being more aggressive, taking jump shots. So huge emphasis, I think, on shooting from a number of players across the roster. And it's very, very clear that the Warriors are going to be trying to replace Klay Thompson by committee and not by one individual player. And I think that's a really good thing as well, because I'd be surprised, like Buddy Hield's not going to come in and take the 30 minutes a night that Klay Thompson is. I'd be surprised if Buddy Hield's playing more than like 18 minutes a game. I could see him around like around the 15 to 18 mark. Now he's going to have nights where he plays more than that, nights where he plays less than that, depending on how he's shooting the ball, depending on the opponent, depending on the rhythm of the game, all these different things. But it's unfair to expect that Buddy Hield's just going to come in and replace Klay Thompson. It has to be done by committee, and so it's good that this is all stuff that's come out in media day, but again, we don't know whether it can come to fruition until we actually see it with our own eyes once the preseason games start and once the regular season starts at the end of the month. So very interesting stuff there. Just a couple of other points. JK hopeful on his contract situation. Of course, the deadline on October 21, he was basically saying, yeah, like hopefully something gets done. He also said he's not concerned about it. A little bit like Draymond, don't take us for fools, JK. I understand your public view. You're saying to the media that, hey, I'm not concerned about it. Either gets done or it doesn't matter to me. Mate, we're talking about $140, $150 million. That clearly is you're going to be concerned about that in some way. You'd be an idiot not to be. And it's kind of one of those ones where it's an expected, obvious response from the player, but it also would be nice if maybe you just say, hey, you know what? I'd like to get it done. It would obviously be a life-changing amount of money. If it doesn't happen, I've still got the entire season to prove my worth, show how I can impact this team positively, and we'll see what happens in restricted free agency. And we go from there. That would be like nice to hear, but I completely understand like why he came back with the response he did, saying that he's not concerned about it. Kind of remain tight-lipped. Essentially, just it's a response of let's move on from that conversation, from that topic. Like, I get it. I understand it. But to say you're not concerned about it, we're talking about potentially upwards of $150 million for a 21-year-old. I don't care what age you are, that amount of money, you are going to be concerned about whether you get that money or not, right? You are going to be. Again, you'd be an idiot not to be. So, I don't know. I just find that interesting. There wasn't too much in regard to Moses, and he wasn't asked too much about it. Of course, a little bit more of a different situation with him, given we're talking about a far lesser number than what JK could potentially get it. You know, him jumping up to potentially $30+ million a season in comparison, to Moody getting, it's been reported about $11-13 million a season for Moses Moody. Last thing I want to talk about, Steph and his involvement in off-season trade discussions. Obviously, the Warriors targeting Paul George and then Lauri Markkanen failing to acquire either player. I found it really interesting that Steph was kind of asked about his involvement from the Athletics' Anthony Slater. And, Slater mentioned Paul George specifically, but then in Steph's response, Steph brought up Lauri Markkanen of his own volition, which I thought was interesting. the bigger concern here was not necessarily, Steph. Steph kind of confirmed his involvement in trade discussions, said, I'm not the final decision maker, but I have input. We know that. We understand that. We've known that for ages. The bigger issue here was his response towards the end of that. If you go check out the clip that Slater posted on Twitter, he said, we've got a chance to be relevant early in the season and then reassess from there. Couple of issues with that. I think, first of all, that only fuels speculation that, hey, there's probably going to be a trade mid-season. And this is a team that hasn't historically made trades throughout a season. But from what Steph said there in that comment, from what, Dunleavy said the other day in regards to being about as impatient as a franchise can be, that clearly tells you that, hey, this team is probably going to be aggressive on the trade market, and you can expect something will happen unless the team takes a massive jump at the start of the season. All of a sudden they're 30-10 in their first 40 games, or 28-12, something like that, and they actually look like they could be a deep playoff team as is. The more concerning element and the more frustrating element for fans is Steph Curry saying, I've got a chance to be relevant. I think a lot of fans listen to that and think, really? A Steph Curry-led team. Steph Curry, we just saw what he did in the Olympics. Yes, he's 36 years old, but he's somewhere near the prime of his career. And we're just trying to be relevant. We're not trying to win championships. We're not trying to make the NBA Finals, deep playoff runs. We just want to be relevant. That's a problem. That's a problem. And if we're trying to be relevant around the franchise's greatest ever player in Steph Curry, what are we doing? Why aren't we doing something to change that and not just be relevant, but be a genuine force again in this league? So I think that's where the frustration really lied for Warrior fans, and that word of relevance, right? And that's a problem. That is a genuine problem. If you've got Stephen Curry on your team, one of the greatest players in NBA history, the greatest player in franchise history, and you're just battling to be relevant, you've just got a chance to be relevant. You can't have that. You cannot have that. And so clearly Steph's still got some confidence given he signed that 1 year, $62.6 million extension in the offseason. But I think that confidence would have to lie around either these young guys taking a big jump, and probably a bigger jump than most expect, or probably more likely is that, hey, there will be some kind of significant trade forthcoming within the next, well, before the February 6th trade deadline. And Steph looking at it as, hey, we had a fair crack at Paul George. We had a fair crack at Larry Markkinen. Didn't get either of those two guys. But hey, you know what? At some point, at some time soon here, I'm going to have the second co-star, offensive co-star that I need in order to be more than relevant, to be back somewhere near championship contention. So certainly some interesting comments from Steph there. The other thing, GP2 basically went out of his way before reporters could even get a question in, just to say, hey, I plan on being much more healthy, much more consistently on the floor this season. Of course, he's been limited to just 66 of a possible 164 games over the past 2 years through a myriad of different injuries. So looking forward to seeing GP2 back on the floor. Of course, that's going to raise some question marks for Steve Kerr and his rotation. Talking of rotation, Warriors rookie Quentin Post stated his ultimate goal for his rookie season is to crack the rotation, which I've wrote about for BlueManHoop.com. It'll be out later in the day. Basically, that's going to cause even bigger problems for Kerr, because he's got enough question marks as it is surrounding the guys on the main roster. If there's guys on a two-way contract like Quentin Post coming up and saying, hey, you know what? I need some playing time, I don't know what Steve Kerr is going to do. Now, it's a little bit different given Post is a center, and the Warriors do have a lot of depth, but not necessarily at the center spot. And so maybe there's a pathway there, given, Post is quite a unique prospect given his combination of shooting and size. Maybe there's a pathway there for him to actually crack the rotation as he set out to do. But I envy Steve to a degree in terms of what he has to do with this roster in terms of putting lineup combinations together. And now as we enter the preseason, that is going to be the biggest watch for me. The Clippers game now less than a week away. 5-6 days away? I'm thoroughly looking forward to seeing what the starting lineup looks like and what the rest of the rotation looks like, and how that transforms as well throughout the remaining 5 preseason games beyond that. Anyway, guys, I'll finish it up there. It's now just gone 10 p.m. I'm getting a little bit tired. I'm feeling a bit better than I probably thought I would, given what I've done over the past 24 hours. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're on YouTube and haven't subscribed already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. And other than that, I'll see you on the next episode.